Chapter 50. On the 1st of August, 1855, I received a letter from my bishop in Chicago, instructing me to attend a spiritual retreat to be given the next month at college in Chicago for the clergy of the Diocese of Chicago and Quincy. Wishing to study the personnel of that Irish clergy, of which Bishop Vandeveld had told such frightful things, I went to St. Mary's University 2 hours ahead of time. Never did I see such a band of jolly followers. Their dissipation and laughter, their exchange of witty and too often unbecoming expressions, the tremendous noise they made in addressing each other at a distance, their "Hallo, Patrick! Hallo, Murphy! Hallo, O'Brien! How do you do? How is Bridget? Is Margaret still with you? The answer is yes, yes, she will not leave me, or no, no, the crazy girl is gone," were invariably followed by outbursts of laughter. What stranger, in entering that large hall, would have suspected that those men were about to begin one of the most solemn and sacred actions of a priest? With the exception of 5 or 6, they looked more like a band of carousing raftsmen. About an hour before the opening of the exercises, I saw one of the priests with hat in hand, accompanied by 2 others, going to every one collecting money. I suppose that this collection was intended to pay for our board during the retreat, and I prepared to give $15. The big hat was literally filled with $5 and $10 bills. I asked, "What is the object of the collection?" "Ah," they answered with a hearty laugh. "Dear Father Chiniquy, is it possible that you do not know it yet? Don't you know that when we are so crowded as we will be in here, the rooms are apt to become too warm and we get thirsty? Then a little drop to cool the throat and quench the thirst is needed," and the collectors laughed outright. I answered politely but seriously, "Gentlemen, I came here to meditate and pray. I have given up, long ago, the use of intoxicating drinks. Please excuse me, I am a teetotaler." "So are we," they answered with a laugh. "We have all taken the pledge from Father Matthew, but this does not prevent us from taking a little drop to quench our thirst and keep up our health. Father Matthew is not so merciless as you are." "I know Father Matthew well," I answered. "I have written to him and seen him many times. Allow me to tell you that we are of the same mind about the use of intoxicating drink." "Is it possible you know Father Matthew and you are exchanging letters with him? What a holy man he is, and what good he has done in Ireland and everywhere," they answered. "But the good he has done will not last long," I said, "if all his disciples keep up their pledges as you do." As we were talking, a good number of priests came around us to hear what was said, for it was evident to all that the bark of their collectors not only had come to shallow waters, but had struck on a rock. One of the priests said, "I thought we were to be preached to by Bishop Spalding. I had no idea that it was Father Chiniquy who had that charge." "Gentlemen," I answered, "I have as much right to preach to you in favor of temperance as you have to preach to me in favor of intemperance. You may do as you please about the use of strong drink during the retreat, but I hope I also may have the right to think and do as I please in that matter." They then left me, saying something that I could not understand, but they were evidently disgusted with what they considered my stubbornness and want of good manners. I must say 2 of them, Mr. Dunn and the other unknown to me, came to congratulate me on the stern rebuke I had given. After apologizing for the behavior of his fellow priests, Mr. Dunn expressed his disgust over what had just occurred, informing me that the total amount collected was $500. Stepping closer, he said, "Do not think that you are friendless here in our midst. You have more friends than you think among the Irish priests. I am one of them, though you do not know me. Bishop Vandeveld has often spoken to me of your grand colonization work." Then he pressed my hand in his, and taking me a short distance from the others, said, "Consider me hereafter as your friend. You have lost a true friend in Bishop Vandeveld. I fear that our present bishop will not do you justice. Labelle and Carthavel have prejudiced him against you, but I will stand by you. If you are ever unjustly dealt with, as I fear you will be by the present administration of the diocese." After the mild and paternal ruling of Bishop Vandeveld, neither the priests nor the people of Illinois will long bear the iron chains which the present bishop has in store for us all. I thanked Mr. Dunn for his kind words, and I told him that I had already tasted the paternal love of my bishop, being twice dragged by Spink before criminal courts for having refused to live on good terms with the 2 most demoralized priests I have ever known. At that moment, the bell called us to chapel to hear the regulations of the bishop in reference to the retreat. At 8 p.m. we had heard our first sermon by Bishop Spalding from Kentucky. He was a fine-looking man, giant in stature, and a good speaker. But the way in which he treated his subjects, though very clever, left in my mind the impression that he did not believe a word of what he said. He delivered 2 sermons each day, and the Reverend Mr. Van Helist, a Jesuit, gave us 2 meditations, each of them lasting 40 to 50 minutes. The rest of the time was spent in reading aloud the life of a saint, reciting the breviarium, examination of conscience, and going to confession. We had half an hour for meals, followed by an hour of recreation. Thus were the days spent. But the nights! What shall I say of them? My pen refuses to write all of what my eyes saw and my ears heard during the long hours of those nights. The drinking used to begin at about 9 o'clock, but within half an hour the alcohol was beginning to unloose the tongues and upset the brain. Then it began the witty stories, followed by the most indecent and shameful recitals. The lascivious songs and the most infamous anecdotes were flying from bed to bed, from room to room, till 1 or 2 in the morning. One night, 3 priests were taken with delirium tremens almost at the same time. One cried out that he had a dozen rattlesnakes in his shirt. The second was fighting against thousands of bats, which were trying to tear his eyes from their sockets. And the third, with a stick, was repulsing millions of spiders, which he said were as big as wild turkeys, all at work to devour him. In addition, dozens of them were ejecting their overloaded stomachs in the beds all around. The third day I was so disgusted and indignant that I determined to leave without noise, under the pretext that I was sick. There was, however, another thing which was still more overwhelming. It was the terrible moral struggle in my soul. The voice of my conscience, which I had to take for the voice of Satan, was crying in my ears. Do you not clearly see that your church is the devil's church? That those priests, instead of being the Lamb's priests, are the successors of the old Bacchus priests? Read your Bible a little more attentively and see if this is not the reign of the great harlot, which is defiling the world with her abominations. How long will you remain in the sea of Sodom? Come out of Babylon, if you do not want to perish with her. Can the Son of God come down every morning in body, in soul and divinity, into the hands and stomach of such men? Can the nations be led into the ways of God by them? Are you not guilty of an unpardonable crime, when you are planting with your own hands over his magnificent country a tree bearing such fruits? How dare you meet your God after you have so deceived yourself and the people to believe that these are representatives, the leaders, the priests of the church, outside of which there is no salvation? Oh, what an awful thing it is to resist the voice of God, to take him for the evil one, when by his warnings he seeks to save your soul. Fearing lest I should entirely lose my faith in my religion, and become an absolute infidel by remaining any longer in the midst of profligacy, I determined to leave. But before doing so, I wanted to counsel the new friend whom the providence of God had given me in Mr. Dumb. I went to see him after dinner, and taking him aside, I told him at what had occurred last night, and asked his advice on my determination not to continue the retreat. He answered, "You teach me nothing, for I spent last night in the same dormitory where you were. One priest told me all about those orgies yesterday. I could hardly believe what he said, and I determined to see and hear for myself. You do not exaggerate. You do not even mention half of the horrors of last night. It baffles any description. It is simply incredible for anyone who has not himself witnessed them. However, I do not advise you to leave. It would forever ruin you in the mind of the bishop. The best thing you can do is to go and say everything to Bishop Spalding. I have done it this morning, but I felt that he did not believe half of what I told him. When the same testimony comes from you, then he will believe it and will probably take some measures with your own bishop to put an end to those horrors. I have something to tell you confidentially which surpasses anything that you know of abominations of these last 3 nights. A respectable policeman who belongs to my congregation came to me this morning to tell me that the first night 6 prostitutes dressed as gentlemen, and last night 12 came to the university after dark, entered into the dormitory, and went directed by signals to those who had invited them, each being provided with the necessary key. I have just reported the thing to Bishop O'Regan, but instead of paying any attention to what he said, he became furious against me, saying, "Do you think I'm going to come down here for my dignity of bishop to hear reports of degraded policemen or vile spies? If they want to damn themselves, there is no help. Let them go to hell. I'm not any more obliged or able than God himself to stop them. Does God stop them? Does he punish them? No. Well, you cannot expect from me more zeal and more power than our good common God." With these fine words ringing in my ear, said good Mr. Dunn, I had to leave his room double quick. It was no use for us to speak to Bishop O'Regan on that matter. It will do no good. He wants to get a large subscription from those priests at the end of the retreat, and he is rather inclined to pet than punish them, till he obtains the $100,000 he wants to build his white marble palace on the lake shore. I replied, "Though you add to my desolation instead of diminishing it by what you say of the strange principles of our bishop, I will speak to my Lord Spalding as you advise me." Without a moment's delay, I went to his room. He received me very kindly and did not at all seem surprised at what I had said. However, when I told him the enormous quantity of liquor drank, and that the retreat would be only a ridiculous comedy if no attempt to reform was tried, he agreed it would be advisable to try. Though this is not our program, we might give 1 or 2 sermons on the necessity of a priest giving an example of temperance to their people. Will you please come with me to the room of my Lord O'Regan, that we may confer on the matter after you have told him what is going on? Yes, said Bishop O'Regan. It is very sad to see that our priests have so little self-respect, even during such solemn days as those of a public retreat. The Reverend Mr. Dunn has just told me the same sad story as Father Chiniquy. But what remedy can we find for such a state of things? Perhaps it might do well to give them a good sermon on temperance, Mr. Chiniquy. Mr. Chiniquy, I am told that you are called the Temperance Apostle of Canada, and that you are a powerful speaker on that subject. Would you like to give them 1 or 2 addresses on the injury they are doing to themselves and to our holy church by their drunkenness? If those priests can understand me in French, I replied, I would accept the honor you offer me with pleasure. But to be understood by them, I would have to speak in English, and I am not sufficiently free in that language to attempt it. My broken English would only bring ridicule upon the holy cause of temperance. But my Lord Spalding has already preached on that subject in Kentucky, and an address from his lordship would be listened to with more attention and benefit from him than from me. It was then agreed he should change his program and give 2 addresses on temperance. But though these addresses were really eloquent, they were pearls before swine. The drunken priests slept as usual, and even snored almost through the whole length of the delivery. It is true that we could notice a little improvement and a little less noise in the following nights. The change, however, was very little. On the 4th day of the retreat, the Reverend Mr. LaBelle came to me with his bag in hand. He looked furious. He said, "Now you must be satisfied. I am interdicted and turned out ignominiously from the diocese. It is your work. But mind what I tell you. You will also soon be turned out from your colony by the mitred tyrant who had just struck me down. He told me several times that he would at any cost break your plans of French colonization by sending you to southwest of Illinois, along the Mississippi to an old French settlement opposite of St. Louis. He is enraged against you for your refusing to give him your fine property at St. Anne." I answered him, "You are mistaken when you think that I am the author of your misfortunes. You have disgraced yourself by your own acts. Nobody here is more sorry than I am for your misfortune, and my most sincere wish is that the past may be a lesson to guide your steps in the future. The desire of the bishop to turn me out of the colony does not trouble me. If it is the will of God to keep me at the head of that great work, the Bishop of Chicago will go down from the episcopal throne before I go down to the beautiful hill of St. Anne." He soon disappeared. But how the fall of this priest, whom I had so loved, saddened me. The next Sabbath was the last day of the retreat. All the priests went in the procession to the cathedral to receive the Holy Communion, and every one of them ate what we had believed was the true body, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. This, however, did not prevent 13 of them from spending the greater part of the next night in jail, to which they had been taken by the police from the houses of ill fame, where they were rioting and fighting. The next morning they were released after paying large fines for the trouble of the night. The next day I went to Mr. Dunn's parsonage to ask if he could give any explanation of the rumor which Mr. LaBelle had mentioned that he was to be removed by the bishop from the colony to a distant part of the diocese. "It is unfortunately too true," said he. "Bishop O'Regan thinks that he has a mission from heaven to undo all his predecessor has done. One of the best and grandest schemes of Bishop Vandevelt was to secure the possession of the magnificent state of Illinois to our church by inducing all Roman Catholic immigrants from France, Belgium, and Canada to settle here. Our present bishop opposes that plan and will remove you to such a distance that your colonization plans will be at an end. He says that the French are generally rebels and disobedient to their ecclesiastical superiors. I have, in vain, tried to change his mind. I told you before, he often asks my opinion on what I think is best for the diocese, but my impression now is that he wants to know our views only on the pleasure of acting opposite to what we advise." At the end of the retreat, Bishop O'Regan's plea for funds was a success, even though everyone present felt it was ludicrous to build a $100,000 palace in such a young and poor diocese, we immediately raised among ourselves $7,000 in cash and promissory notes as a show of goodwill. Then, promising that we would do all in our power to raise the balance of that ridiculous sum, we were simultaneously blessed and dismissed from our retreat. I was but a few steps from the university when an Irish priest, unknown to me, ran after me to say, "My Lord O'Regan wants to see you immediately." 5 minutes later, I was alone with my bishop, who, without any preface, told me, "Mr. Chiniquy, I hear very strange and damaging things about you from every quarter. But the most of all is that you are a secret Protestant emissary, that instead of preaching the true doctrines of our Holy Church about the Immaculate Conception, Purgatory, etc., you spend a part of your time in distributing Bibles and New Testaments among your immigrants. I want to know from your own lips if this is true or not." I answered, "A part of what the people have told you about the matter is not true. The other is. It is not true that I neglect the preaching of the doctrines of the Holy Church about Purgatory, Immaculate Conception of Mary, Auricular Confession, or the respect due to your superiors. But it is true that I do distribute the Holy Bible and the Gospel of Christ among my people. And instead of blushing at such an unpriestly conduct, you seem to be proud of it," angrily replied the bishop. "I do not understand, my lord, why a priest of Christ could blush for distributing the word of God among his people. As I am bound to preach that holy word, it is not only my right but my duty to give it to them. I am fully persuaded that there is no preaching so efficacious and powerful as the preaching of our God himself when speaking to us in his holy book." "This is sheer Protestantism," he answered me angrily. "My dear bishop," I answered calmly, "if to give the Bible to the people and invite them to read and meditate on it is Protestantism, then our holy Pope Pius VI was a good Protestant. In his letter to Martini, which is probably in the first pages of the beautiful Bible I see on your lordship's table, he not only blesses him for having translated that book into Italian, but invites the people to read it." The bishop, assuming an air of supreme contempt, replied, "Your answer shows your complete ignorance on the subject on which you speak so boldly. If you were a little better informed on that grave subject, you would know that the translation by Martini, which the Pope advised the Italian people to read, formed a work of 23 big volumes, which of course nobody except very rich and idle people could read. Not 1 in 10,000 Italians have the means of purchasing such voluminous work, and not 1 in 20,000 have the time or the will to pursue such a mass of endless commentaries. The Pope would never have given such advice to read a Bible as the one you have distributed so imprudently." "Then, my lord, do you positively tell me that the Pope gave permission to read Martini's translations because he knew that the people could never get it on account of its enormous size and price? And do you assure me that he would never have given such advice had the same people been able to purchase and read that holy work?" "Yes, sir, it is exactly what I mean," answered the bishop with an air of triumph, "for I know positively that this is the fact." I replied calmly, "I hope your lordship is unwillingly mistaken, for if you are correct, the stern and unflinching principles of logic would force me to think and say that the Pope and all his followers were deceivers, and that encyclical a public fraud in his own hands. For we Catholic priests make use of it all over the world and reprint it at the head of our own Bibles to make the people, both Protestant and Catholics, believe that we approve of their reading of our versions of that holy book. Had I thrown a spark of fire on a keg of powder, the explosion would not have been more prompt and terrible than the rage of the prelate. Pointing his finger to my face, he said, 'Now I see the truth of what I have been told, that you are a disguised Protestant, since the very day that you were ordained a priest. The Bible is your motto. For you, the Bible is everything, and the Holy Church with your popes and bishops, nothing. What an insolent, I dare say, blasphemous word I have just heard from you. You dare call an encyclical letter of one of your most holy popes a fraud?' In vain I tried to explain. He would not listen, and he silenced me by saying, 'If our Holy Church has, in an unfortunate day, appointed you one of her priests in my diocese, it was to preach the doctrines and not to distribute the Bible. If you forget that, I will make you remember it.' And with that remark, I had to take the door which he had opened. Thanks be to God, this first persecution I received for my dear Bible's sake did not diminish my love, my respect for God's holy word, nor my confidence in it. On the contrary, on reaching home, I took it, fell on my knees, and pressing it to my heart, I asked Heavenly Father to grant me the favor to read it more sincerely, and follow its divine teachings with more fidelity till the end of my life.